We continue with part 2 in our 3-part airing of the history of alternative dispute resolution in Jamaica with our nation's political ombudswoman.
So we were involved in recruiting a lot of different consultants and experts and hosting a lot of consultations with the entities that make up the justice system to look at things like improvement in technology in the justice system, redrafting of legislation, drafting of procedures, training of different elements, including, say, communications training for the judiciary. We did a number of reports where we were assessing things like customer service in the justice system, and the Canadian Dispute Resolution Foundation, and the development of ADR in Jamaica. The Justice Reform Implementation Unit was a great innovation of the government of Jamaica and the government of Canada, and intended to be the engine for the reform process for the justice system, in which, literally billions of dollars were being and were to be invested. So working with the Ministry of Justice, then it was a very privileged time for me, a great opportunity to, contribute to that process, including Justice Reform Plan, which would have required a significant investment from the government of Jamaica, which I think still needs to be done. And really, we had some experience at Dispute Resolution Foundation working with the Canadian government, because we had done the Social Conflict and Legal Reform project some years before, right, which was quite a substantial grant that we received. And that grant had allowed us to start what we call the Peace and Justice Centers. That was the engine behind developing the national network for delivery of conflict resolution services. So we had, through that program prior to this, already established, say, the flanker and the trench down Peace and Justice Centers, which, because we were working in communities that typically were not getting that kind of support and that kind of training, it also allowed us to be a resource through which other development funds could be channeled for other projects, since we would have an audit, annual accounts and that sort of thing, and also have a team member on the ground. And if you look at particularly the Flanker Center, it became, a cause célèbre across the country, because many members of the private sector who had not looked at it were now happy to invest, and a lot of resources got invested in the physical plant. The team there, Marilyn Nash of blessed memory, just an absolute gem. They were now recruiting workers for Sandals. Sandals donated training space for the mediation, and really that was initially facilitated by Janilia Brickian of PALS, who also had a relationship with them. So we were happy to work with people, we never came to this with an idea that we are the it, we must hold on to everything. But we did feel like we had to hold on to the meaning and the values behind. We did feel like, if anybody was going to work in the area, we would be happy to work with them and see how we could build something together. We prefer that to saying, we don't want to be in a competing environment. This work of conflict resolution is more about collaboration than competition.
And that has,
yes.
That has followed through to today. You
Yes.
find that you still see DRF opening arms to engage everyone.
Absolutely. I think that allowed us to, in some ways, I think, influence the way the whole NGO community was developing. And we were also at a time when there were many NGOs, many people actively engaged in nation building. And a belief that if we stayed the course for long enough with all these different entities, then there was a real possibility that we could address some of our fundamental issues. More needs to be done. We were working strongly with Peace Management Initiative, we're working strongly with Rise Life Management, you name the organization that was positively engaged and had some connection to our work who were there. So that was prior to my leaving the Dispute Resolution Foundation to go to the Ministry of Justice. While in the GRI, you were also doing a number of other programs were going on. Citizen security and justice were being accessed for court improvement and so on. So I think that period between, say, 2010 and 2017 was a very dynamic period in the development of the justice system. We have seen where the Chief Justice was very much involved. That is Chief Justice Zela Makala and her successor, Chief Justice Brian Sykes, who was on the board of the Dispute Resolution Foundation as her nominee for some time. So there's a real understanding of the role of ADR in the improvement of the delivery of justice. And we did have some the Ministry of Justice continues to give its financial support through a grant to the Dispute Resolution Foundation, recognizing that this is not really capable of being a profit center if we're to address the concerns. So income generating, yes, but a profit center, not really. Because even when, like the Ministry of Justice would have had a lot of grants, these were for specific deliverables, and there are other things to be managed. So I think the GRIU continues to be a very valuable part of the institutional fabric for the moving forward of the justice system, and that has to continue unabated. We're seeing, for example, where people are doing their they're coming their first appearance before the court from a lockup or from a jail, and those sorts of digital engagements were part of the work of the ministry and the GRIU.
We've now ratified with the Singapore Convention, whose focus is on mediation. How do you feel about our local level readiness? How do you feel about where we are? Since their model is designed to uniform and to have an efficient framework for international settlements agreements, that is.
So it's quite interesting because I think maybe 25 years ago, there was discussion of having an international arbitration center in the Caribbean, arbitration/dispute resolution center. And at the time I had proposed Jamaica as that center, which would have created something that people around the world would have been able to relate to such an entity. The DRF got to do a lot of that because we did so much work across the region and beyond. But with the settlement of commercial disputes, before it would have been simply that we were mediating a dispute between a Jamaican entity and another entity. It was not a matter of a third-party jurisdiction and people being able to enforce there. So this is a big step in terms of the international commercial mediation and settlements. And it is good that Jamaica has attached itself and has, agreed to be part of this. I think that we did that in 2020. Now, in terms of the number of trained, we have enough people who are trained in Jamaica who would have the competence to mediate any dispute. Because we keep making the point that the way we have trained mediators in Jamaica, it is not about the subject matter of the dispute. It is about the process to be utilized to arrive at an agreement that is acceptable to all those who are involved. And I think we keep getting this, there is a contrary view, which is about expert settlement, meaning subject matter expertise. So I do believe that we have the process experts, but who may not have, and there are many who have experience because they may have been doing mediation for 20 years. There are a lot of persons, some are attorneys, some are not attorneys, who have done, mediations where we have settled disputes involving millions of US dollars, where we've done disputes involving huge corporate entities operating in Jamaica and operating in other countries, where we have resolved disputes that they may have to do with labor matters, but they may also have to do with technical matters like fiber optic cables and such the like, shipping and everything, because the concept we have is that those who come to the table should have the expertise in the subject matter and be enabled to share so effectively that if there's an imbalance of technical expertise, then we are to help them bridge that gap so that everybody at the table understands the issues enough to make the decisions that need to be made. So I think it is a matter now for the Dispute Resolution Foundation and others to say, we have done the training, we have done a number of matters, we are on the Supreme Court roster, yes. And based on those three things, we can put our names out there as being certified and equipped to take on matters. I would recommend that the administrative support for those cases could be done by the DRF, as we were doing some arbitration matters. And I believe other entities may be doing that as well. So that one could put out there that the DRF has a roster of persons who are available to do international commercial settlements. Because then the DRF's credibility would be backing the competence of these persons as well as the administrative elements. There are mediation rooms there, but I've also said if what is required is a room at the Pegasus for the thing, then that becomes part of the cost of putting on the event. If it requires secretarial support, that becomes part of the cost. If it requires coffee, tea, and lunch, that becomes part of the support. I had visited I've had visited the office in London, and I saw where they had different scales with different services. You could have different packages depending on the needs of the disputants and the arbitrators or mediators, and that we had actually introduced at the Dispute Resolution Foundation. And now in the time of virtual meetings, it's so much easier because originally we were using TV screens to do our remote meetings and telephones, and now we'll be able to use the platforms that are available. So there's absolutely no reason why Jamaica should not push forth with a lot of energy, get onto the websites of the different entities, develop our marketing tools, and put ourselves out there as a preferred, competent institution or country to deliver. We are fortunate that
being such a geographical gem to the entire North American belt.
Absolutely. UNCITRAL, all of these other things that we have already made ourselves a part of. We are English-speaking country,
yes,
but we also have competent translators for different languages, and we also have competent translators for people who are hearing impaired. Right? So all of the ways that we would need to facilitate, and certainly if a person is visually impaired, they could be using the Braille and voice combination, to participate if we're using charts and that sort of thing. So my recommendation at this time, in light of the Singapore agreement, that Jamaica, through the various organizations such as your own, Jamaica ADR Society, the Dispute Resolution Foundation, and other partners, could come together and create a product that is marketed globally to offer mediation commercial mediation settlements, as well as also the arbitration settlements. Because with the digital engagement now, it's a level playing field. People don't have to travel to any country to be able to get it done.
Please join us next week for part 3 as we look back on the history of alternative dispute resolution in Jamaica, our final episode with our political ombudswoman.